to the Metal Command Podcast.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to the Metal Command Podcast. Tony here with you. As always, excited to be here with everybody today. And of course, I do appreciate any support you give me for this program. So if you like what you see and hear on YouTube, but by all means, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And if you are following me or watching this program on any other form of social media, by all means, give me a like and a follow there. Today's interview is with Kragen Lum from the band Heathen. He's a guitar player, one of the guitar players in Heathen. Heathen has a new live album coming out March 14th called Bleed the World Live. They have a lot of stuff going on, including a lot of music written and ready to go for a new album and much more. So Kragen and I talk a lot about the band. We talk about a lot of what's going on with the band, and we talk extensively about the live album. So sit back and enjoy. Here is the interview with myself and Kragen Lum from Heathen. Welcome back, everybody, to the Metal Command Podcast. Tony here with you. And I have Kragen Lum back on the show. Just talked about him, just talked about how great the track that they have up on YouTube, Son of My Hand, sounds, and have an upcoming live album called Bleed the World Live, which I think is just sounds fantastic. And I'm really excited to have you here. So let's talk about this live record you have coming out.
Awesome. Thanks, Tony. We recorded every single show on our tour that we did with Overkill in 2023. Mm-hmm. And we recorded both the band and the audience. And then we scoured through all of the shows to find the best performance of each song or something special for each song. And we worked on kind of compiling it, pulling it all together from all the different shows, and got everything set up, and Zeus mixed it, and it sounds incredible. It sounds amazing. And we're super stoked because I don't know. I grew up listening to live albums, and part of the experience of listening to the live album is the audience reaction and the audience participation and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I've listened to some recent live albums, and there's no audience, they didn't record it, or whatever, and it's kind of it just loses something. There's those classic live albums Speak of the Devil and Tribute and Live After Death, and I mean those have there's a feeling that you get when you listen to it, and so we wanted to try and capture that in a more modern live record. By
Tribute, I'm assuming you're talking about the Randy Rhoads Ozzy Osbourne live album. Okay, I just want to make sure that was my first release by Ozzy, and that album, it ended up getting me hooked onto him. But I remember, it's funny you mentioned that record because I remember the audience reaction. I remember, a lot of that live album really getting me into that. And in fact, I probably wouldn't like live records if it weren't for that. So it's a pretty, and I think part of it was recorded in Cleveland. I could be wrong though.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that was the rumor. Nobody really knows, but so it's cool. And I think you picked a great single, "Son of My Hand." I think that's probably one of my favorite songs off of Empire of the Blind. I think Empire of the Blind went down some avenues that Heathen never had before, and I think that's one of those tracks that really, honestly, is probably one of my top 2 or 3 on the album.
Oh, cool. Well, I mean, what's interesting is it's not the most streamed song or whatever, play wise. Yeah. But when we play live, the crowd is really into it and participates, as you can hear in the mm-hmm. live video and watching the video. And it's great, energy exchange between the band and audience. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So we wanted to kind of lead off with that. Sure. And we've got another song that'll sort of be featured, and another music video, another live video to go with another song from the record. So it came out great. We've got at least one song from every album. We were able to find an extra song that wasn't on our usual Overkill tour,
Mm-hmm.
tour set list. We had a couple of off-date shows that we did in the U.S. with
Right.
Exhorder. So we pulled "Set Me Free" in from one of those shows, and
Sure.
it came out really good, man.
Yeah, you played Goblin's Blade, which is actually one of my favorite tracks off of that album.
That's
Classic song,
that
definitely.
seems to be the fan favorite from
Yep.
that first record.
Absolutely, it's my favorite from that album. Honestly, I was when I looked at the track list, I was pretty excited for that. So, yeah.
Cool.
So you have this available. It's for pre-order. It does ship, according to the website, March 14th. But
Yep,
you have it
that's
on
cool.
red. You have it on red vinyl. You have a really cool slip mat that you have available for it. CD, a couple cool T-shirts, and if you want to save a little money and want everything there, you can buy the whole. You can have it all bundle type thing going on. So,
Yeah,
uh,
the You Can
yeah,
Have It All bundle is only available in the Heathen store.
correct.
So yeah, and the vinyl is it's a transparent red. You can't really tell from the way it's presented, but
Right.
it's going to look really cool. I'm stoked on it.
When you're recording a live record like that, and I know a lot of bands might, will record live albums from like around. I mean, how painstaking is it to go through all of those shows and then be like, hey, pick out what's the best performance. Like, for example, let's say you play 50 shows. You got 50
Yeah.
concerts to go through. Do you do it like, do you go through 50 versions of the song and pick out the best of that 50? Do you go through each show individually? Like, how did you guys go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to go through, and there are going to be some things where like there's a technical glitch, or like,
Mm-hmm.
somebody's wireless cut out, or I mean, there's any number of like problems that can happen during a live show.
Yeah.
So not all of them are going to be usable. You find the ones where everything is usable, and then basically just kind of scour through it and see, okay, where was the magic, So for
Yeah.
example, like we had there's one show where I think uh there are like four songs from it, I think, from the Houston show, where we were just on fire like that
Yeah.
particular night for whatever reason. And the audience was also on fire. It's one thing if we're playing and the audience isn't there with us, or vice versa.
Right.
Sometimes there was a great audience, but like something happened, somebody dropped a pick or a stick, or the mic cut out, anything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically that was what really kind of took us a long time, was kind of filtering out all of the stuff and finding the best ones, and then going in and basically like when the show's recorded, it's the whole thing, so you have to go in and you have to cut it up and find just the song and get all those files, and so
Right.
there's a lot of work kind of piecing it all together.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. But I think you did a great job. From the song that I've heard, I think the mix sounds great. The sound of, just everything live just comes through really nicely, actually. And, you did tour. You actually, again, like every other band, man, I mean, I've seen you've had tours canceled out from under you. I mean, I don't know how many times. Has that, you're an industry guy, you manage bands, you work for a record label. Has that gotten any easier, or is it a lot harder? Is it still pretty hard to get something put together for a band, say, of your size?
you mean in terms of putting together tours?
Getting tours, getting, obviously everything's expensive, so
Yeah.
not losing your ass on the tour either. Has it gotten any easier for you, or is it still difficult?
Yeah, I mean, it's still a little tough. We've had some tours that were really good.
Mm-hmm.
Others where we barely escaped by the skin of our teeth financially. 2022, like we had a summer tour and it was 7 weeks long, and we came home broke. Like
Yeah.
we broke even. We didn't lose any money, but we didn't make anything.
Yeah.
And imagine, everybody for 7 weeks. We knew that going in, and did it kind of as an investment. But the last like 23 and 24, we were lucky because we got some good tour offers. We got to tour with Overkill in Europe and in the States. We got to tour with Symphony X.
Yeah.
So those tours are good because we're exposed to an audience that we might not get exposed to. Heathen isn't one of those bands that like you see stuff on Blabbermouth or the big metal websites. Like other bands, like other Bay Area bands could fart and it would be on Blabbermouth. But we could put out a live album and have a press release from Nuclear Blast and it doesn't get picked up. So
Yeah.
we are doing whatever we can to get the band more exposure and play to audiences that may not have heard us. We made a lot of new fans on the Symphony X tour, for example,
Yeah.
because that audience hasn't necessarily heard us, but there's a lot of kind of commonalities. We have a melodic singer, we do a lot of melodic stuff in our songs, and we have elements that I think the fans of Symphony X like, for example.
Yeah.
Overkill is thrash, so of course, there's a lot more of those people probably heard Heathen before.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
So
or the trap that sometimes you fall into is, they've heard of you. They've just never gone and checked the band out. Like, if you're a thrash, they're like, oh, you hear of this band, people that are like fans of like thrash metal might say, oh, I've heard of that band, but I never got a chance to listen to them. So, playing with Overkill, who is a band that, for the most part has been, like some of the, I don't know, more veteran thrash metal bands, like Exodus and everybody have really been putting out great stuff. I look at Heathen, and you guys have put out album. It's kind of like Flotsam and Jetsam too. They're kind of like one of those bands. They put out 3 really great records. The last 3 albums they put out. You guys have put out albums, in my opinion, that are on par just as good as a lot of these other bands. It's more of an exposure thing.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yep. And you have a melodic singer who I think I've always loved David's voice. He you don't have as many people exposed to him, right?
Yeah, and I think part of that was because, if you look back on the early days of the band before I was a member,
mm-hmm.
The band only did one US tour for Breaking the Silence, and they only did one European tour for Victims, and that was it. They never really got to tour. They made some mistakes back then. There was the period of time where after the first record, which did really well. I mean, Breaking the Silence was actually a big album for them. And then they kicked Dave out and got Bailoff in the band and screwed around for a few years and then finally put out Victims. If they had followed the first record up 2 years later with Victims, and then it kept the momentum going, it would have been a different story for the band.
Yeah, sure.
But unfortunately, they kind of lost that. And then there was the 18-year gap between that and Evolution, and then a 10-year gap between that and Empire. And I said to the guys, I'm like, we're done with that. And then COVID happened when we released Empire. So it's like, that took 2 years away from us in a weird way. Yeah. And, I have a mountain of music and I was actually working on a song right before this. So, we've got the whole new record written. We've got another record after that, and then another album worth of songs, so it's like, we've got tons of material. It's just a matter of getting it going, and we kept getting these good tour offers, even though we wanted to go back in the studio, and we're like, we should take this, so we could have gone into the studio last year, but the Symphony X offer was it was great, and we just really wanted to do it. So,
well, I explained this in my podcast episode because every band, because of COVID, any record that they were probably working on at the time, you're looking at it getting delayed 2 years because you have two choices. You either go out the gate and tour when everybody else does, or you wait Let everybody
Yeah.
get out there, and then you go when everybody, when a lot of these bands aren't playing as many shows. So, you were kind of, it was a double-edged sword. I mean, you were screwed practically either way. And, a lot of bands that are recording albums that are coming out this year, when I talk to all of them, they say, man, we really wanted this album out 2 years ago. And, it's like you're in that same boat. And, during COVID, when you're not putting anything out, all people are doing is writing music. So I know so many bands that have like 2 albums, 3 albums worth of music they've written. And
Yeah.
they just haven't put it out because you start getting tour offers again. You got to make up for lost time, lost exposure, stuff like that. So I get it, man. And I'd be curious, so you talked about writing music too. And I'm curious, I thought Empire of the Blind was a much different record, a good progression for the band. There's a lot of different stuff on there, like the first song in the album. I mean, all I could think about was classic Bay Area thrash metal. But then as you get into the album, there's some different stuff on there.
Yep.
What are these songs sounding like, in comparison to, say, that record?
Like the new stuff?
Yeah, the new stuff.
Expect the unexpected.
Okay.
I, I don't like repeating stuff. I mean, I tell this, I have a couple of guitar students, and I tell them there are guitar players that have a bag of tricks and they just repeat the same licks over and over again. There are a lot of bands that are the legacy bands, or whatever they're calling old bands now. They're on like this repeat mode to satisfy their fans.
Sure.
And to me, it's a disservice to the actual music, because there's nothing really. How do I put this? They're good songs, but there's nothing special or unique or different. They're cookie cutter.
Right.
And so, like with Heathen, I don't want to do that.
No.
So every album has always been different, and this next one will be different. It's darker, it's heavier. There's still fast stuff. In fact, like one of the songs is probably the fastest Heathen song of all of them. But it's also super melodic. It's got depth. I just, I mean, I can't wait to show it to people. All the songs are demoed except like 3 of them.
Okay.
It's different. I think each time we do something, it's different, and it should be, because you think about the classic bands, they weren't afraid to try different things.
No.
And there are too many thrash fans that have a limited set of rules that they think they should apply to thrash bands. And unfortunately, what happens is when you do that, you put a fence around what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the music starts to sound the same, and you end up with like all, band to band, all the riffs sound similar, and all the singers sound like Schmear from Destruction. And, at some point it's like the genre isn't going to go anywhere if we keep putting fences up around it. So we're ripping the fences down and just doing what we want, and making good songs.
Right.
I follow my muse, or whatever you want to call it, and for the creative stuff. And if it sounds good to me, and it's good, once you put the guitar tone and Dave's voice on there, it sounds like Heathen. And that's what it should be for any band,
Speaking of Dave's voice, does him being a more melodic singer help with the songwriting? I mean, does it kind of expand what kinds of songs you can write based on the fact
for sure
he can sing melodic? Because, most thrash bands, you're thinking of guys that are shouting, you got guys like Blitz, or, guys like Zetro, or, the guy from Havoc, those guys are good for what they do. But, when you have a guy like, and this, I hate to reference Flotsam and Jetsam, I'm going to use it as a reference. You have a guy like
That's
Eric.
okay.
You have a guy like Eric, who's a melodic singer. And I really fully believe that they're taking more advantage of that that part of his voice now for these last
Absolutely.
few albums. And I
Yeah.
feel you did the same thing with Dave, because when I listen to Dave on the early stuff, he have like a more clean singing voice, like a Joey Belladonna, or a little bit, yeah, but he's a little harsher, but he could sing very melodically. And I always think of him and Eric as like the two overlooked singers in thrash metal, right? Because
Right.
of that. But does that help with the songwriting, and really, writing different
Yeah.
kinds of songs for this band?
It allows us to do almost anything we want to. I
Right.
mean, if you look at the last record, we had thrash songs where the vocals were less melodic at times and more aggressive.
Yeah.
And then we also had a song like Shrine of Apathy, which was a ballad,
Yeah.
and it was in drop C. And that's something that we couldn't do if we didn't have a melodic singer. We don't really have a ballad on the next record, but we have lots of melodic parts. In some ways, for a thrash band, it's harder, and I think a lot of I think in a lot of ways, like thrash and death metal, because they don't have a melodic singer, they're able to really just focus on rhythmic elements with the vocals.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like thinking about death metal, for example, it's all rhythmic, right? They might do scream on pitch occasionally, but for the most part, it's rhythmic, all the
Right.
vocal delivery, right? And it's easier to tie a rhythm into thrash metal than it is to tie a melody into it.
Okay.
So you have to not be afraid to like change the riff. If the vocal melody needs a certain note and your riff doesn't have it, then you got to find a way to make it so that it all fits together and works, And I think it's like a puzzle sometimes. I know, like the song Empire of the Blind from the last record was a puzzle. And I had it written for a long time. It had a different name. Some of the lyrics were different. Some of the riffs were different. And it just took a long time for me to solve the puzzle and have it come together. And it wasn't until I put another part on top of the riff where the magic happened. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy it. Honestly, the creative stuff is my favorite part of playing music. I like
Yeah.
it more than touring. To me, the end result, the suffering of going through the creation process and then coming out with something on the other side where you're like, that gives me goosebumps, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, whatever. That's magic to me. Playing live can be, but there's just the tour. It's the travel
Yeah.
for me that gets me.
Yeah. You know what the other thing is? The other talent that you have, a lot of people, I'll bring up here, is you write tablature books, and you've done that for those records, which I think is actually a really cool thing. It's, they got those available in your store actually. So it's like, do you like doing that? Is that something you like to do? Like when you map that stuff out?
I I love it. I don't have enough time to do it all myself. I actually have a transcriber, a great guy named Evan Bradley. His transcriptions are awesome. And he helps me with some of the songs when I don't have enough time to do them all myself. He's very good at it. I like having those books because to me, a lot of this music deserves to be transcribed and done properly.
Mhm.
If you look at old stuff, like the Injustice for All book is notoriously bad, for example. Um, uh, and it does a disservice to the book when it's not accurate with the music, and you're like, wait, this doesn't sound right, or that's not where they're playing it when I watch the video, or whatever.
Yeah.
So I love doing it. I'm actually working on the Breaking the Silence guitar book right now. I'm trying to get it finished.
Yeah, that's cool. And you know what? I do want to throw this in here. A lot of people might forget, part of the delay between albums too is, you were filling in for Gary with Exodus for quite a while too. That always throws a wrench into that too, and that's, you have a lot of other stuff going on in between that, but I'm really happy to hear that you have a lot of music written, because when I listened to those two records and I went and revisited them, like a week ago, I was like, man, I forgot how much I love these records. And Evolution of Chaos, it came out forever ago, but it doesn't seem like it seemed like it came out like 6 months ago to me. But then I realized how old that album is and that it had already been reissued already once. So
It's 15 years old already.
yeah, that's some crazy
uh,
stuff.
yeah, so I mean, I wrote 3 songs for Evolution,
Hmm.
and then after that tour cycle was over around 2012, I started writing Empire of the Blind. So
Yeah.
it was 8 years before we got to record that stuff. Now, in a way, I'm glad that it took so long because I was able to really refine a lot of the music. Um, but it was a little frustrating. I was enjoying being a hired gun for Exodus and touring, and
Yeah.
not really having not having many responsibilities other than show up and play.
Hmm.
Um, but I also really wanted to get back to being creative, and it was a little frustrating. I mean, I kept talking to Lee about it, and finally I got to a point where I'm like, dude, I got a whole album's worth of stuff. Can we go? Like, can we just go with it? And he's like, yeah, yeah, let's do it. He had heard it all already.
Hmm.
Um, so, uh, I have probably this new album was started around 2014, like writing wise.
Hmm.
Um, and then I have a bunch more, I have so much music. I don't have enough time to get it all out of me, but I'm working on it.
No, I gotcha. The experience in playing in Exodus, what was it? What were some things from doing that you learned? Was there anything that really learned that kind of helps you do what you do now as far as, playing that music? I mean, it's somebody else's music. Gary is obviously not a slouch on guitar whatsoever. What was that experience like? And did you learn anything positive from that?
It was great. I mean, the experience was great. I had a great time with those guys all the way up until the end when things went south.
Yeah.
Uh, but I learned a lot about touring. I learned a lot about the business. I started working on their business, uh, and I grew a lot during that time as a like live player. Also,
Hmm.
I'm not the most outgoing guy, so getting up on stage, you know, it wasn't easy for me. I'm just kind of being a little shy.
Yeah.
I was able to kind of grow out of that a lot playing with Exodus. And yeah, I mean, I learned a lot, good, bad, ugly, all of it. I learned stuff. So it was a good experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
That's really awesome. So if someone were to ask you, timetable wise, when would you want to have the next record out? Would it be next year? Sometime around then?
No, this year.
So this year. Okay, cool.
That's what we're working towards. Now, that's if everything goes our way.
Yeah.
But yes, we're working towards that already. I'm already working on scheduling the first recording sessions, um, and finalizing stuff. All of the rhythm guitar tracks for the whole album are finished. I'm done with them. Most of my guitar solos, I'm done with them. So a lot of it's already complete in a way. It's going to be a matter of, getting in and getting the drums recorded and then getting everybody else to do their parts,
Hmm.
instruments, and, you
Yeah.
know, and the vocals and everything. And then, we sort of have a head start on it because I have all the guitar, well, not all, but 90 something percent of the guitar tracks finished already. So what I'm doing over the next couple months before we have our one-off show in Chicago
Yeah.
is I'm going to be working on trying to finalize the rest of the guitar tracks, and then start working on whatever other pieces need to be done. I've got a couple of songs where the vocals still need to kind of be reworked a little bit, but like I said, I mean, 2/3 of it we could go into the studio right now and record it.
Wow,
So
that's really good news. I always
yeah.
Because when I ask that question, I always ask, you know, how long is it going to take to record it? And then because merchandise, depending on how many bands clog the system, can take quite a while as well. I mean, if like Taylor Swift or Adele go out and make like 12 varieties of their next record, it's going to clog the system up, right? I mean, and or you can get the stuff done pretty quickly. So I always look for the worst case scenario. So it'd be great if it came out this year. That would be awesome. But
I mean, worst case scenario, I would expect that we'd have the first single from the record out at the very least. But
yeah,
but I'm actually hoping that we have a song or two out before that.
Yeah, sure.
I've got stuff that's in the works already. A song I was just working on that we're talking about maybe releasing that won't be on the record, that might be a single before the record comes out. So
yeah,
my goal is to get away from what the band has done in the past, and in terms of how we've released music, and release music frequently, like really frequently.
Yeah,
possibly multiple times a year, where if we have a new song or whatever, just something new out there all the time, because that's the way of the future. And the band has worked at a snail's pace in the past, and I want to pick up the pace. So
yeah, I don't blame you. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm pretty excited to hear that, because again, there's so many circumstances that have held things back for you. But I really believe, like I said this in my podcast episode, I was talking about how a lot of these thrash bands, some of the older ones that were around for a long time, are just cranking out some of these albums. These albums are sound pretty good. They are pretty good. And I've always said that you guys, when I was talking about the two releases, just how good these albums are, that you're right up on par with a lot of these bands from a quality standpoint, from the production to the songwriting. I mean, I remember when Evolution of Chaos, I remember when that album came out, and I was like blown away by the first song you put out, that was put out. It was like the early days of YouTube, if you think about it.
Dying Season.
Yeah, it was Dying Season. I remember hearing that, and I was like blown out of the water by that song. And
that ridiculous zombie video.
Correct. I remember. Yeah, going back, but no, it is correct. It is different because, now when you look at the promotion of an album, people have to pick singles, and a lot of times you pick really to kind of go at it. You have 3-4 singles, and you put them up, every so often, just to kind of stay relevant. And you got bands going out doing videos of what they wrote the song about, but really it's whoever puts the most content really gets the most exposure at this point, because, or at least the chance of that, because it's, again, everything's different than it was even 10 years ago.
It's kind of like back to the days when the Beatles would release a single,
mm-hmm.
And then another single, and then another single, and then after a while they'd put it all together on an album.
Yeah,
that's kind of what's happening now. Not necessarily in the metal world, but in hip hop and pop and every other genre.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, people are doing that because that's the way the Spotify algorithm works. And even though Spotify doesn't pay us shit, it is the biggest streaming service, and people are tailoring their delivery of music to that kind of, to that platform.
Yeah.
And YouTube also. I mean, having a music video for this single, for example, has been extremely helpful. We probably have gotten more traction from the video than just the audio. You know what I mean? And part of that is because the first time that people hear music is on YouTube for the most part. So if you have a video where there are people in it from the band, the chances that people are going to go watch the video or at least listen to it are higher. We were at already over 80,000 plays for the music video in 8 days or whatever. So, I get that, because when I get press releases from publicists and a single comes out, ironically, at least just this is for me, they may have a download of it, they may have whatever for it, but most of the time, if I want to go listen to it, I'll click on the link to wherever that song is at, usually on YouTube,
and I don't even bother downloading the track. I actually go and listen to it there, you know.
Right.
And the thing is, people don't understand that Spotify, aside from the fact, I mean, yeah, it doesn't pay bands a ton of money, but that's that's one of the big metrics that people use to judge a band's audience. You know,
Absolutely is. Yeah.
it really is. And there's different algorithms. Like for my show, for example, when I started doing an actual regular show, video show, I mean, I'll record one 45-minute episode. I'll upload it, but then I actually chop it up into 4 pieces and put those videos up separately, because if you ever look at like the average view of a video, usually I think on my channel it's about 9 minutes is like the average view.
Sure, makes sense.
And you have to get into the algorithms, and Spotify and a lot of these other things are basically the same thing. So that's one of the things that's changed a lot. But I don't, I go right to the YouTube link. When people send me these press releases or an electronic press kit before they give me the full album, I mean, it is a much different thing. But it's cool though, because then you keep your name out there. And I've always said Heathen is a band that is very good. It's a matter of exposure.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's what we are hoping to change. And, by releasing music more frequently, and plus, I mean, realistically, you look at any of the legacy bands. I mean, some of these guys are in their 60s already. And like, how much longer are you going to play thrash metal? You know what I mean? Like, I mean, and do it well. I mean, not, it's almost like athletes when they overstay their welcome and they can't do it like they used to. And I don't think any of us want to be like that. We want to get as much music out of us as possible and play as many places as possible before the game is over.
Yeah, it's not like thrash metal is like the easiest stuff to play as far as, your body is concerned, right? I mean, as a guitar player, you got to have a pretty good right hand on the guitar to really be able to play a lot of this stuff, especially from a rhythm standpoint. And I mean, I'm always surprised when I go and see a band and these guys are like in their 60s, and for a minute I'm watching, and it depends on who it is, but I watch bands that are in that age group, and sometimes you can tell that they shouldn't be doing that, but then there's bands you're like, dude, has this guy ever aged? It's like you run into that. And I mean, I get it. I totally understand where you're coming from, but going into you said something earlier. I meant to kind of follow up with you on. You talked about how thrash metal, when you're within that realm, people build this fence. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I've been kind of piecing this together with bands, through their press releases, is a lot of them are not calling themselves thrash metal bands anymore. It's kind of like they're kind of dropping that. And I think part of that reason, it feels like to me, is they want to expand their sound a little bit and not have that description, because of a lot of people expect them to stay in the fence is kind of what I'm seeing. Have you seen more of that?
2 reasons. Yeah, there's kind of 2 reasons for that. And I apologize. We broke up there for a minute, so I would probably just look like I was like sitting still.
No, yeah.
So the fence is one thing for sure. There are the fans and some of the bands have just put this wall around the music, and it can't go anywhere. It's trapped. And because of that, if you look at it compared to other subgenres of metal, so these walls have been built up around the genre. They've walled bands in. They can't do anything outside of this box that they're in.
Yeah.
And the music is stale.
Yeah.
A lot of the classic bands, like, to me, it's like the albums are musically the same thing over and over again. And then recording wise, what I'm noticing is that bands are getting their advances and they don't have enough money to survive, so they're making their albums as cheap as possible, and the sound of the albums is getting worse.
Yeah.
You take into consideration that, like, our entire genre, probably all the mix engineers, except Zeus, why we use him, A lot of these mix engineers are using the same samples, the same for the drums, the same guitar tones to reamp stuff.
Yep.
And so everything just kind of sounds samey. And when you have, limitations on the music, then it's even more samey. And so the genre can't go anywhere. And it's closed itself off to the world. So people are dropping the name thrash metal because it has a negative connotation in terms of not being all that popular right now. And then it also has a limitation, and they don't want to be limited. So it doesn't surprise me. I really don't care what people call it. I mean, you can go all the way back to the Heavy video where Lee was interviewed in the late 80s, of him saying that it doesn't matter what you call it, pink, brown, metal. I don't care. It's and that's kind of what Heathen is anyway.
Yeah.
The band's never really had any. We've never put any limitations on what we can do. There's always something different and unique on each album.
Sure.
And it's just we want it to continue being like that. So we might have some straight up thrash songs, and we might have some stuff where you're like, what the fuck? Well, where did that come from? So, but that's how it should be. It's good to have surprises on records. Otherwise, you're like, oh, another album. I can't wait. You gotta see what's inside the box when you open the album. So.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And, it's interesting because some bands that I've heard who kind of dropped that whole moniker, they put out some really good records. It's kind of like, you're right, they don't sound the same. I always call it, and I don't want to bash this guy, but when you talk about all the production sounding the same, I've nicknamed this the Andy Sneap effect. Where, you know what I'm saying? Where everybody, if we go and listen to one of Testament's albums and I go listen to Exodus or, one of those guys, they're very, very extremely similar. They could be probably using the same plugins. I'm not bashing those bands for doing that because those records sound good, but I can understand where you're going with that as far as a lot of these bands are concerned, for sure. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Andy does a great job with those records, and he's resurrected Judas Priest. They sound great again.
Absolutely.
But I'm talking about just, I mean, I would exclude Andy probably from that. I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
But the thing for me that's missing in modern music is the uniqueness of each band's sound.
Yeah.
And that's something like I've been talking about. Everybody records a DI these days for guitar. Like, have a DI so I can reamp it. I don't want to do that. I want my tone. I want the tone. That's the band's sound. I don't want it reamped with some sound that's got something else. So that's where I get away from that, and it probably makes it more difficult to mix, honestly, because the reason why people like specific tones is they work with them and they know what frequencies, and it's easier for them to get a mix going quickly.
Yeah.
When you don't have to worry about something special and unique, but that's also what makes those old records so great.
Yeah.
And why people are like, oh man, there was so much magic in those old records. We didn't reamp anything on Empire of the Blind. It was my Mesa Boogie Mark IV the whole time.
Yeah.
And it was just, I gave the tracks. It wasn't reamped. And I think that's good. I think that's what bands should do more often. I think that's what some producers should do more often, is find something that's more unique than just the same 5150 that's used on all the other projects. That's why bands all sound the same. It's not, it's the band and the producer's responsibility to kind of look at it and go, what is the sound? What is the sound of this band? Let me hear you in the room and let's capture whatever magic it is,
Sure.
So that's what we try to do with the Heathen records. We don't want it to sound the same as everything. We want it to sound a little bit different, And of course, I don't know how many times I heard people complain like, oh, it sounds like Exodus. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. We have a melodic singer and harmony guitars, and almost orchestration of guitars in some parts, like does a riff maybe sound like Exodus? Okay, fine, but it's a totally different tone, it's a different
Yeah.
brand amp.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think you sound anything like Exodus. I think probably the closest thing that I've ever heard of this band sounding close to that would maybe be some of the opening riffs of The Blight. And maybe that's it,
That's
other than,
correct. Yeah, sure. I
yeah.
can see that. I mean,
But other than that,
Yeah.
because The Blight on the last album, I mean, that was just an ass kicking in your face thrash metal song. And you had a little bit of there's a little bit of an Exodus feel in the beginning, but I don't think you sound anything like them, to be honest.
I mean, the chorus almost has that like almost power metal feel. That like the chorus in The Blight has this almost like power metal feel, like the old Heathen stuff, like the first record. So, we're just going to keep writing whatever sounds good to us and make it great and, add layers of depth so that when you listen to it over again, you hear things that you maybe didn't hear the first time. And, I mean, there's so many layers of guitars on the record. Like if you look at the tab book, there's like 6 staffs.
That's
you
a lot
might
of
not
layers.
hear it all, but if I took one of them away, you'd feel it. You'd
Yeah.
be like, something's missing here. So we do a lot of what I call ear candy, where it's there, it's not prominent, but it gives you a feeling, and that stuff is in the old Metallica and all the stuff that the classics that we still love to listen to. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to end it off here, but you do have merchandise for sale in the store. I am going to put that link into the show notes. And any last words for anybody that's going to be checking this interview out and going to probably be checking the live album out?
Yeah, definitely check out the new live album. It comes out March 14th. It's called Bleed the World Live. It came out killer. The mix is awesome. The crowd in it is killer. Everything's natural and live, and it's a great record. I really want everybody to go check it out. Please pre-order your physical copies. If you're listening and watching from Europe and you can't afford the shipping from the Heathen store, order from Nuclear Blast directly. If you like ordering on Amazon, get it. I don't care. We don't care. We just want to sell as many copies as we can. It's you know how it is in this day and age. There's a lot of things for people to buy and not as much money as we would all like in our pockets. So
absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, check it out. And follow us on socials. We got a lot of cool stuff coming up. New songs, new record that we're working on. It already has a title. The artwork is in progress. So I mean, we're deep in. We're looking forward to unleashing it on the world.
Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching. And if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support.